Hello everyone. For the start, I have to say that the best thing you can do for yourself is to make diabetes a hobby for you. Before I did so, I have fought with my diabetes quite a bit. But given the fact that we have to live together forever in one house, I prefer to have the best possible relationship with my diabetes. So I could recommend it to everyone if your diabetes doesn't listen to you, or you are fighting, make it a hobby. As a disclaimer, I'm not a medical professional. I don't even provide medical advice. I'm not a representative of any company, and I don't recommend any specific products. If you accidentally disagree with something, there's nothing easier than to try everything in real life or your own. I will not cover such classic myths that we can see, for example, in the TV shows, where you can see things like advanced or serious diabetes, or where hypoglycemic coma is treated by immediate injection of insulin. I will cover the myths and misconceptions which I constantly see in different Facebook groups, discussion forums, and which are surprisingly also committed by a long-time diabetics. So it won't be completely exhaustive list. Those of you who are using the CGM, now we can align our glycemias. I hope you've prepared a big cup of coffee and put the kids in their beds, because it's going to be a long ride. For the next 6 hours, using this scheme, we will explain how insulin enters the cell. Don't worry, it was just a little prank to scare you. Bear in mind that everything I will tell you, I have tried on my own skin, and to prove it, there are some of my real-life experiments. I'm constantly trying every piece of diabetes tech, including the algorithms, pumps, loops, CGMs, pre-production samples that are not on the market yet. Here are a few shots from the test of 4 sensors at once. During this test, I didn't limit myself in diet. I tried to eat as normal. I didn't avoid fast food. Here are some of my lunches, dinners. These are different applications that was used to monitor the CGMs. The biggest challenge was to connect all 4 sensors so that they could be visible online in real time in Night Scout. But at the same time, I don't have to keep 4 or 5 phones in my pockets. Here you can see the results of our 4 sensors. They differed by up to 1 millimole in that or that parameter in overall values. Everyone was good for something else. So there is no universal product for everybody and for each purpose. Each of them was better for something. But sometimes experiments can have some potential risks. And here you can see that one of those experimental Chinese sensors had the amazing feature that it dropped the wire, and the wire traveled to subcutaneous tissue below my triceps. And although the surgeons tried to find it for 3 hours, they failed, and so I'm now upgraded with the wire from the day. The wire you can see here on the picture at the scale is another one, just to show them what they were actually looking for. So that's just brief introduction. You as a diabetic using a CGM must face different graphs and trend lines on daily basis. And it would make me quite a gleeful joy if I found out that you have the same deformed brain as I have. Look at those curves and think about blood glucose you see. It happens to me relatively often. When I walk past the TV and I wonder, oh my god, what a terrible blood sugar levels. And then I find that it's, for example, a stock exchange index. So if something feels not right with those curves, the first on the average temp is the average temperature in Prague. The other one represents the development of the price of sugar over the last 20 years. The third one is the stock market showing the biggest global insulin manufacturers after the Twitter was bought by a certain Elon and introduced a function that verified accounts will be marked with blue tick mark. Everyone could buy this blue tick mark for about $7 US. And certain user did so. He bought verified account for $7 and subsequently announced that insulin will be free of charge from the day. And as you can see, stock markets reacted immediately with a huge billions drop, and it took several weeks to go back up. And the only very last curve is really a blood glucose. But it's a blood glucose of a healthy person. And that was a bridge to the first myth, and that is that you have to have absolutely flat lines. The good news is that you don't actually have to. Even the healthy person doesn't have flat lines. Here you can see the compensation of a person who is not diabetic. Here you can see BG levels of a healthy man. This is blood glucose level of a healthy man. This is also non-diabetic, and this one is too. Even the healthy person doesn't have flat lines. It's impossible for them to have flat lines, and there is a good reason for this. It's quite simple. Because the body of a healthy person reacts to the rise of blood glucose level and to food. And it's a reaction, and therefore it is delayed by design. Diabetic, on the other hand, could have flat line because he can exactly time bolus and affect the peak of that insulin. Another widespread myth is that diabetics should cut out all the sweets, restrict carbohydrates, jump on low-carb diets, and so on. Of course, I don't want to encourage you to gluttony, because if you eliminate the largest variable, which is the carbs, the management would be much easier. But you have to ask yourself if that is the diet and life you want to live for another 20, 30, 50 years. In general, there is no reason why a diabetic couldn't eat like everybody else. Of course, you need to work with insulin. You need to think about what type of insulin you use, what is the duration of action, and what is the peak of that given insulin. And then you have to cover most of the carbs with it. I say most of them because there are carbs that don't need to be covered with insulin, as for example fiber or polyols, sugar alcohols. Of course, there will be a difference in the bolusing for legumes or for the cake. There will be different glycemic indexes, so you have to know all the variables in your equation and dose and time the bolus properly. At this point, I would like to mention the phenomenon of carb threshold, which could be translated as physiological limit of carbohydrate absorption. It is somewhere around 50 grams per hour in normal population. It means that the body cannot absorb more carbs in that given time. It cannot do it faster. The exception is trained athletes, triathletes, cyclists, marathon runners, etc. For those, it may be up to 120 grams per hour, but their stomach usually cannot last that for a long time. Triathletes would confirm that the first few hours of the race, they go on various gels and snacks and fruit, but the next few hours they can hold just fluids or sometimes not even that. And why do we bother? Because it has no sense to bolus above your carb threshold, as your body cannot absorb more carbs. If you give a bolus to cover all the carbs in the high carb meal and you bolus all at once, you are likely to end up in hypo, because the body will absorb the carbs in a steady pace. Bear in mind the carb absorption is linear, while the insulin action is not linear. Here on the screens for Under My Fork application, you can see the diabetics don't have to avoid sweets. And on the last picture on the right, you can see that even 310 grams of carbs doesn't have to make you spike if you add 20,000 steps to your insulin calculation. Another widespread myth is that a diabetic must essentially eat a fixed amount of carbs. We probably all experienced that when we were diagnosed for the first time. Eat fixed gram of carbs, exchange unit, don't skip second dinner, and so on. I personally don't like exchange units or bread unit because it's not officially standardized unit, and it only brings confusion and misunderstanding to the whole thing, often mistakes in the carb calculations. If you use closed loop system or mobile application or bolus wizard in pumps, you usually enter carbs in grams, not in bread units. As I said, it's a non-standardized unit. It means something else in different parts of the world. It could be anything from 10 to 15 grams of carbs. But there are exceptional cases where there is a place for exchange units or bread units. These may be patients who don't have a mental ability to count carbs or to read different labels, etc. Fixed regime is obsolete now, as we don't use slow insulin that have long effect, and we can overlap the doses. Most of you are on the pump or on fast analogs, and you also don't have accurate information about insulin on board. Either you have a pump or smart pen, or you can manually enter it to the app. If you have fine-tuned your basal profile, you can easily skip the food or practice intermittent fasting. I'm not talking about you should hold a hunger strike or fast for 40-50 days, but I mean usual meal skipping when you suffer from intentional flu or when you test your basal. There are cases that diabetics wake up in the morning, have a blood sugar of 12 millimoles, but he tries to eat breakfast, or on the contrary has 12 millimoles after the first dinner, but because the doctor said he had to have the second dinner, so he tries to do it. No need to do that. No need to blindly follow fixed regime. Make it flexible, adapt it to your needs, and benefit from fast insulin analogs and insulin onboard data. Another widespread myth is that the puncture from cannula insertion corresponds with the subcutaneous tissue status. There are people using cannula for 5 to 7 days, and they wonder why they have a bulge and why the insulin doesn't work and why they have inflammation. But somehow they don't think that it could be related. They always say that it's not a subcutaneous tissue issue. I only have a small puncture mark on the skin. When you scan the QR code below, you can read a study and look how the subcutaneous tissue actually looks and what the difference with Teflon and steel cannula. Teflon cannula is to be used for 3 days at max. Steel cannula for 2 days. If you are stretching this time, you risk a problem in the form of lipodystrophy, which may be hypertrophy, hypotrophy, or various local changes in absorption reliability, or your subcutaneous issue can fail completely. And that's not quite optimal variant, as you have one subcutaneous tissue for the rest of your life. Another factor for site absorption quality or stability, besides the cannula duration, is also the amount of insulin delivered through that particular site. Therefore, some DIY loops provides information not only about duration, for how long do you use the site or cannula, but also how much insulin was delivered to this site or through this cannula. Maybe you have noticed for yourself that, for example, the second, third day of the site, it doesn't work so well or so reliably. It can be the amount and not the time. Try to track it yourself. Usually when the insulin flow in the site is reduced because of illness or activity, the cannula on that site lasts much longer and works better. Another myth I would like to correct is that you have to keep the insulin constantly in the fridge. It may be the case if not opened. Once you open it, you can store it as a normal room temperature. But you have to protect the insulin from freezing or overheating because it still is a protein hormone. So it can be clotted, it may degenerate, degrade, and then will not work. Some diabetics pre-fill the cartridges and then store them filled up in the fridge, I honestly didn't understand what is the real benefit here, because you may save 2 or 3 minutes of your life, but in any case you put yourself in a risk, because most of us don't have at home dedicated medicine fridge for insulin. So often your prefill cartridges end up somewhere between eggs and butter. It's not entirely antiseptic environment, so keep that in mind before you prick it into your body. But what can happen if you use those more alkaline insulin is that they can degrade faster or can react with the plastic cartridge in which they are stored. Therefore, the original insulin vial is always glass. And it also can be contaminated with some microplastics. You may say that it is a negligible quantity, but try to calculate it yourself. If you use standard insulin with 100 units concentration, you know that 100 units of insulin is 1 milliliter. So you can calculate how much insulin you already inject to your body in your diabetic career. In my case, it's something like almost 6 liters of insulin. And that could be a fair amount of microplastics. I recommend reading the insulin leaflet. It may be the size of a small apartment, of course, but you will find a lot of amazing information in there, including pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics, storage condition, temperatures, chemical properties, etc. I will not ask you to raise your hand if you have read it, because we wouldn't see many hands in the air. Another evergreen that many people believe is that if you have non-calibrating CGM, there is no need to check it or to calibrate it. Non-calibrating sensor means it is factory calibrated to some value to measure with some tolerances, but it doesn't mean you have to believe it blindly. So even if you use non-calibrating sensor, there can be from time to time need to calibrate it for accurate measurements. So twice a day I check if it's true and if it's not true, or if it's not true. All sensors which I have tried so far, and it means almost all of them, can be calibrated. And if not through the original app like LibraLink, then through some other application, third-party app, for example Xdrip, Diabox, uGluco. There are plenty of them. This is extra important if you use a hybrid closed-loop systems, because values from the sensor determines the dosage of insulin. So even non-calibrating sensor has to be at least checked, and if is necessary also calibrated. Another myth that I hope is gradually disappearing is that you doesn't have to count anything labeled with diet, diabetes for diabetics, no added sugar, etc. Unfortunately, this is not true for several reasons. Products for diabetics are, with some exceptions, sweetened with the cheapest artificial sweeteners on the market, to make the manufacturer cost as little as possible. They are often genuine sweeteners. They are banned or restricted in some countries because it's not proved they are safe for health. Also, diet products contents like lemonades often differs in different countries, because in those countries they can have different legislations in terms of safety of artificial sweeteners. So the diet Fanta, for example, will have different composition in Denmark than in Norway. Diet products are often sweetened with fructose. That is not a bad thing per se. Fructose itself is a sweetener, has a lower glycemic index than glucose, but the problem is the amount, because if you eat fructose in its natural form, that means in form of fruit, you don't eat an enormous amount, and it's always complemented by fiber. Bear in mind that up to 37% of that extra fructose can metabolize even without the insulin and directly to fat, and then it will put your liver into stress. So fructose is not an evil, but if there is a lot of it and not complemented with fiber, it can be a problem. If you have any diet sweets at home, then you can check for yourself on the label. They usually contain more fat, and for a simple reason. Because if there is no sugar that has some technological properties for that product, it's necessary to replace it with something different with similar technological properties. Either you replace it with fat or with starch or guar gum. Another thing, at least here in Czech Republic, is that the labeling of diet food, label for diabetics, it's not regulated at all. So if you put a diet label on a bag of sugar, it has absolutely the same validity as on products in the grocery. Here you can see 2 packs of oatmeal. Product Natural is on the left and Product Natural Light is on the right. And the package says it has 30% less sugar. But when you read the label, you will find that the product label as light is improved with potato starch and glucose syrup. So the diet product has in fact 20% more carbs, fast carbs, than the natural one on the left. I try to solve this issue with the National Agricultural Inspection, which acts as a food regulation body in our country, to look at it and explain it to me. The funny thing was that I submitted a complaint to investigate oatmeal porridge, and the response was signed by Mr. Francis Oat. And the whole absurdity of the situation is illustrated with the statement of the spokesperson from this regulatory body. I was told the following. Hello, Mr. Tečka. The products below are not suitable for consumers with more advanced form of diabetes. What the heck is that? Advanced form. Anyway, we recommend to consult it with your MD. And now the essential part. Oatmeal porridge light contains statistically about 30% less sugar in general comparison with similar products available on the market, not in comparison with our product Natural. Unfortunately, this practice doesn't break the law or legislative. Here you can see another example where the light labeling in this case doesn't relate to carbs content but to fat content. But of course it would have effect also on carbs content. If you remove fat, you would change technological properties, so you replace it with starch or gum. Therefore, light mayonnaise will have more carbs. It's still about the technological balance to make it work in the final product. Here you can see acceptable daily intake table. It means how much you can consume every day without having any negative consequences. You would have to try very hard to consume more than this amount. Most widespread Diet Coke, Cola Zero, can contain about 87 milligrams of aspartame per 1 can. And you would have to drink about 30 cans per day to exceed acceptable daily dose. So I think in this regard we can stay calm. Other widespread and constantly repeated myth is to fix yourself to some value of A1C. But unfortunately this indicator itself is not very informative at all. It is fundamentally affected by the error of average. You will not know from A1C how much time the patient spent in hypoglycemia or hyperglycemia, neither how serious the hypo or hyper was. To get some conclusive value, you need to combine A1C with time in range, standard deviation, and also the coefficient of variation. Time in range should be at least 80%. Standard deviation should be under 2, and variation should be below 30 or 30%. Bear in mind that the laboratory results may be recorded in different units. You can scan the QR code below to get to the calculator of A1C units. So if your lab gives you a result in other units, you can easily convert it. A1C test is widespread, especially because it's quite easy test and it's very cheap. But today modern endos don't focus on it so much, and I show you why. Because all those three images represent the same value of A1C. All three patients have the same A1C and the same average blood glucose, but only the one on the right can be marked as a good compensation. One in the middle is, let's say, satisfactory, and one on the left is very unsatisfactory. Unfortunately, as A1C is nothing but average, we actually know all the information without the other parameters. We have to always use also other factors as like time in range, standard deviation, and variation coefficient. Another myth that you need to have flat BG lines. As you have seen, even a healthy person doesn't have flat lines. It's okay sometimes not to be perfect. What is important, try to take it as exercise. Diabetes has the advantage that every other day is a new experiment. You don't have any other option than to just run new experiment every other day over and over. So try to take it as an exercise, just an information what you can do differently or better next time. I know diabetics who have excellent compensation. They have excellent results, but at the price that they spend 4 hours per day by managing their diabetes. Therefore, you should find a balance for yourself to endure this stress for the longest possible time. Other related topic with this one is alarm fatigue. It's a phenomenon that indicates a kind of alarm fatigue and concerns patients who have either alarm set incorrectly or they have a lot of them, a lot of alarms. Imagine then when you are on your phone and you have 2 unread messages, you are okay with it and you probably read them. But if you have 300 unread messages, you will delete them straight away and you will not be able to deal with them. It's therefore important to set your alarms correctly. In this context, I would like to give you a tip for 2 books related to the loss of motivation and burnout. And although they are seemingly not related to diabetes, we can use them very well. The first is called How to Live and Avoid the Burnout Syndrome by Radkin Honzák. And the second one is called Getting Stronger Using Stress, Our Way to Resistance by Pavel Kolář. And given that diabetic is a chronic disease and we need to face it every day, over and over, and you can't turn it off for a weekend or for a week or during the vacation, diabetes is always here. I highly recommend these books. You don't have to buy them, you can get them in the library. Another myth that I would like to mention is that some products or some tools are better than any other. You have to realize that your diabetes is unique as you are. Your diabetes is likely to work differently than mine. A lot of manufacturers focus only on marketing parameters that in practical life are not completely usable or essential. A lot of manufacturers, for example, in relation with CGM, list the MART value that indicates how accurate is that given sensor. But if you do spend some effort and find the documentation of studies, of clinical studies of how they measured the MART, you will find that, for example, one Chinese manufacturer has included 120 patients in the study, which was type 2 diabetics, and only 10 patients with type 1 diabetes. Well, just because the type 2 have much less glycemic variability, so the sensor measured more accurately. You cannot trust the papers, the numbers on paper. Always try the products for yourself. Choose the pump, sensor, insulin type or anything else depending on your requirements and how good or how bad it works for you. You always have to try it for yourself. Many people typically when choosing a pump focus on whether it has a tube or has no tube, what size it is, what size is the reservoir, what is the battery, what application, but eventually they could find that they are allergic to the cannula adhesive, or they have intolerance to the cannula material, and they must use some barrier creams or sprays, corticoid creams and so on. So don't look at marketing info, try it for yourself and keep in mind your specific requirements. Someone could prefer a smaller size of a CGM. I would understand that on a 2-year-old child, but for me the most important factor is how accurately and reliably the CGM works for me. If it's not accurate and reliable and without any skin reaction, it could be the smallest or lightest on the world, but it is unusable. So all in all, there is no better or worse product. It's always better or worse for a given person in a given specific life situation and under his specific conditions. The next issue does relate mainly to Czech Republic. Many people sell and buy sensors on the marketplace or in patients groups, or sell under fake names, etc. But bear in mind, all insurance companies have their representatives in patient groups. Insurance companies know very well and monitor what is happening with aids covered by national healthcare system. In addition to all logical consequences of buying resold sensors, like missing guarantee, compatibility issues, safety issues, and so on, there is another important factor, and that is that it has a negative impact on all of us. Because if people sell products on the internet and they get it for free, and those products are covered by national healthcare system, insurance companies of course would eventually notice this, and they could reduce the patient's budget, because they could say, hey, look, people have too much of it, so they sell it online, let's halve the budget. Another topic may be sensitive for some of you. If you spend hours of time and a lot of money and you get yourself a medical tattoo, especially before Christmas, you can notice on Facebook and on the internet increased interest in health bracelets, pendants, earrings, watch straps, and medical tattoos. Some of you may have any bracelet or tattoo with the information that you are a diabetic. What blood type you are, your name, your diagnosis, what medicine do you take, etc. A few months ago I talked about this with a rescue dispatcher and 2 emergency responders, and they confirmed that if they have to save someone's life, they definitely don't look for any bracelet, nor a tattoo, nor the mobile application, because at that moment it's simply not a priority. Some teenagers wear 10 bracelets on each arm, and the rescuer has no guarantee that the bracelet actually belongs to them. But what is good news from emergency responders is that as any loss of consciousness, they automatically measure the blood glucose. They have it in their guidelines. It is established procedure that if it happens that you would lie somewhere unconsciously, they will quickly find it out. You are diabetic, at least in terms of glycemia. Information about the blood group is totally off the table in this case. Firstly, because the ambulance vehicles in Czech Republic don't have any blood transfusions. There are only 3 exceptions in the whole country, and it is motor emergency and air emergency service. They never give you any blood transfusion or infusion without laboratory results or laboratory complete blood count test. Emergency responders recommended that the only thing that really helps them is your birth number. With it, they could find everything they need. Another myth that we will discuss in more detail in our next online session is that insulin is applied to cover carbs only. In the next session we will focus on how to count fat protein units, how to work with them, and how you can utilize them, for example, when doing activity. I bet most of you use insulin and the CGM, and you have found that not only carbs increase your blood glucose, and very often the hyper can be a result of fats and proteins. Fat will cause your liver to be more insulin resistant. It means that you will need more insulin and it will work much slower. In addition, the fat ensures that the food in your stomach will take much longer to digest. And the body is able to generate new glucose from amino acids, which means proteins, in the liver and kidneys. And this process is called gluconeogenesis. The typical effect of fat proteins is that your glucose starts to rise after a few hours gap after the meal, or after the effect of bolus insulin disappears. Typically after fast food meal, highly processed meal, fatty meals like pizza, burgers, ribs, barbecue, pasta with creamy sauce, cottage cheese spreads, etc. As I said, we will cover all this in the next online session. On this picture you can see the chart how fat affects the glycemia after the meal, when the peaks will occur. You can see that if a food contains, for example, 40 grams of fat, it will show up at the earliest 90 minutes after the meal. With proteins, there are even more variables that comes into the role, like protein origin, protein composition, and whole structure of the meal. Another myth is that some stranger on the internet will give you a good piece of advice on how you should manage your diabetes. I can see this on a daily basis. Typically such a question looks like that. A person sends a photo of the meal and asks how much to bolus for that. That information, of course, is completely useless for that person, because everyone will tell something different. When there is a photo of vanilla ice cream, people can bolus for it anything between 2 and 20 units. Bear in mind, you are or should be the biggest expert on your diabetes. Even your nurse or endo doesn't know your body and your reactions as good as you. Therefore, I recommend you to study the basic principles of how everything works, not only in general, but how it works for you specifically, because we all have our own specifics or other comorbidities. You can benefit from different apps, CGM info, charts, analysis, etc. This is covered in another online session. Take each other day as a new experiment, new opportunity to do better. Here on the very last slide, you can see summary of all the topics discussed in this online session. Thank you for your attention. If you have any comments, feel free to contact me. Thanks for watching and see you next time.